Welcome to ESI Focus, where I delve into a specific sector of the esports industry with special guests. This is the first of 4 episodes on esports and data, and it's presented by esports data platform GRID. In this episode, we're going to be delving deep into the world of data by discussing the differences between esports and sports when it comes to either combining data, collecting data, securing data, and even optimizing it as well. So I'm not alone to guide me through this massive topic. And given, that it is about the nitty-gritty with data, I'm joined by GRID Esports CTO and co-founder Chris King, and also the firm's technical lead, Hans Cauwenbergh. I think that's the best I'm probably going to get, unfortunately. How are you guys anyway?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks, Tom. Yeah.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm so glad that I'm just going to say Hans from now on. I think that would be nice.
I mean, I've worked with Hans for a couple of years now, and I still don't think I've quite nailed it. So I think that was a pretty good attempt.
So before we kind of go into like the topic itself, which is kind of about esports and sports day and the comparison behind that, I think it is important to kind of know a little bit more about GRID, get a little bit of a background, and also kind of introduce you guys as well. So Chris, you first, before we start, could you tell us a little bit about GRID and then yourself kind of in between that, since you are the co-founder as well?
Yeah, of course. And first of all, I'd also like to say thanks a lot for having us on. We're super excited to be part of ESI Focus, and we're also really excited to talk about this topic in particular because it's one that is very sort of close and dear to us at GRID. Perhaps I'll just quickly start with introducing myself, because this leads quite nicely then into how GRID began and what we do. Yeah, as you mentioned, so I'm the Chief Technology Officer and also co-founder of GRID Esports. My background is in software engineering, and across my career, I've spent a lot of time building and scaling high data throughput systems. And I've done this across a variety of industries, including digital advertising and also sports data and the regulated sports betting industry. So you can imagine that a lot of the insights and experience I gained in these places have all fed in a lot to the work we do at GRID and the work that I do together with the team there. Some additional and important context and something that is, I think, not uncommon in our industry is that I grew up playing video games, of course. And by my early teens, I was enthralled in the world of esports. Back then, which was in the early 2000s, I think I pretty much consumed every bit of content across every title that was published anywhere, which was possible in those times and isn't really possible anymore, such that esports has grown. But it was this growth and this experience that I gained in my professional career that kind of led me to understand and realized that the data space in esports was wholly underdeveloped. And this led me to, start thinking an awful lot and spending a lot of my spare time trying to figure out, how you might, in a scalable way, get data from game engines and essentially provide a set of data services that were reliable and scalable on top of that. This is kind of a good merger into now what GRID is and what we do. So back in around halfway through 2018, I co-founded GRID Esports together with a group of people that had very much a shared vision in terms of what we should do, as I did. And this is to essentially facilitate the existence of an ecosystem around official data in esports, where the data is rich, the data can be relied on, and there exists an aligned and fair flow of value. And we really believe that this approach and centralizing the use of official data is going to propel the growth of esports titles and also of the esports industry as a whole. So where are we now with GRID? Well, it's been just about 3 years. In fact, I actually think it was announced today was our 3rd birthday. So 3 years. We are a team now of 65 plus strong. They're working for us, from all across the globe, out of multiple locations that we have set up. We have built out our platform, which we call the GRID, obviously, and this offers an array of data services, including a suite of APIs that allow people to integrate high quality and live and rich data directly into their systems. And also we offer a suite of embeddable visual products that allow you to attach a data component seamlessly into a digital product, or on a stream or broadcast, and these kind of things. To finish up, at the beginning of this year, we completed our Series A funding round, and we are incredibly pleased to be able to welcome a group of new investors on board who are sharing in this vision that we have. And so building on that, we're really doubling down for the second half of this year and going into next year, and building on the successes that we've had to date in the space.
Yeah, and so with kind of everything that's going on, obviously you needed someone there to kind of lead the technical side as well. Unfortunately, Chris, I don't think, as much as you probably want to, you probably couldn't do it all yourself and everything like that. So that's where Hans comes in. So Hans, you've been there for most of the time then when GRID's kind of been operating. So can you tell me like the importance of your role and kind of how you got to the role at GRID as well?
Yeah, sure, totally. So I joined GRID back in November 2018, I believe. So pretty much since the start of GRID. And I have a background in computer science. And actually at the time I was also very involved in, gaming, esport titles, the esport scene, and in particular League of Legends at the time. And it just so happened to be that I did my master's thesis about esports visualizations. And at that time, I came across the same problems that sort of GRID was set out to solve there. The data wasn't very accessible. There wasn't a whole lot of granular data out there that was reliable to build this kind of this kind of product that I envisioned on top of. So that's basically how I got into joining GRID, and how I set out to sort of take a lead on developing the data platform that is part of GRID's vision to solve all these problems and make esports data more accessible overall, more high quality, working with official rights holders and so on. So yeah, that's basically how I ended up here.
I think it's very interesting because I do think as well that I think especially over like the last 12 months, like an emphasis has been put on data. I think that data in kind of esports has always been like in the back burner, I think, for a lot of kind of, the public eye, especially in like media. But I feel like in the last 12 months, like there has been this emphasis on data. As popularity grows, people want more data about esports in particular. So I want to just kind of jump in because I know that we've got a lot to kind of talk about. It's a mega topic to kind of go into. So I'm going to ask like a big question to start off with. So why is data so integral to esports and its development? And I mean in terms of like for GRID and for collecting data, not data in terms of like the actual mechanics of the games themselves.
Yeah, gotcha. And yeah, it certainly is a big and very important question. And I think, to those who, aren't working with esports data and in this kind of area every single day, it is something that isn't immediately clear, even if, you are kind of relying on it in some way yourself, being a fan of esports or working within esports. And like you say, it has gained more and more traction and visibility over the last the years or so. But really, a lot of it, I think, is still not super obvious. And so I think, and this is a great place to start because I think there is certainly comparisons to traditional sports in the way data is used in esports and why it's so important. And there are lots and lots of use cases for performance data in esports. And, kind of like to sort of name a few of these, you could think of, team or player performance analysis and how they're looking at their performances and across a range of time, currently at different parts or times within a match. Also, like collating these together to look at their sort of historical performances across different maps or playing different characters or heroes or whatever. This is obviously one important use case. It's a great example because obviously it allows them to do this, but it also drives the sport forward as a whole because they can improve their performances, how they play up against other teams, and generally, keeping up to date with changes and so on. Another clear use case is things like broadcast enhancements, fan engagement. putting statistics on screen is very engaging. It helps you follow the action clearer. One we've also spoken about and is obviously close to me because of my background is the regulated sports betting industry. This is another use case which requires critical, accurate data in real time, so that they can enhance their product set and also calculate accurate odds on top of them. And this is obviously a large space as well that critically relies on data. A few others, we've got fantasy offerings. This wouldn't be much good without a solid data foundation. Sponsorships, data is great content for broadcast, for social media, for all sorts of ways. There are all sorts of ways to use data in esports. And the kind of like overarching point of all these things are, data is something that's integral to esports. It's really, it's a digital sport. It is data from the moment the player clicks the mouse or the action happens in game. And because of this, understanding it and building cool data-driven experiences on top of this and allowing this data to be used is really an integral part of growing esports as a whole. And so accessible data allows for innovation across all of these use cases. Builds them into bigger, more important entities within esports. Then esports grows as a sort of benefit and outcome of that.
I think one kind of point which you did mention was very much at the beginning, and it's funny that you brought that one up first, like player development and kind of player analysis. I do think that is actually one of the forms of data where people don't really think of from an esports perspective. They think of broadcast, I think, and they think of betting as like the two major ones, but player performance and analysis, we're seeing it now in traditional sport, like slowly with, the heat pads and trying to like measure using data through kind of technological equipment. But the benefit with esports is that the equipment's already there. It's just then collecting that data and then analyzing that. And that really does help in terms of development. It kind of one of the few things that esports actually has already like the upper hand on traditional sports is that ability to kind of collect all this because of its digital nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what makes esports so interesting, right? Because you can do stuff that you can never imagine doing in sports in the long run. And we're only just at this tipping point, I feel, where we're sort of overtaking sports with the amount of data that is available and accessible in esports. And, you can imagine just all these teams competing, having a full picture of their competition, basically, which in turn will drive to a way more engaging matches and strategies being carried out, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, throughout the history of esports, there's always been a comparison between esports and sports because, it makes sense. And for the longest time, as esports was growing, there was always this look on esports and how can we do things kind of in the way that sports does it? Because, this is there and there are big sports and it's successful and it works. And I think data is one of the areas where very quickly, if not already, then very soon, sports will be looking to esports because we're really leading the way in this because esports is digital. We don't have this physical barrier.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's kind of go into then a little bit about like the technical aspect of like collecting all this data. So Hans, like obviously giving your like background with GRID and then your experience before that as well, like how does the collection of data in esports actually compare to collecting sports data? Is it widely the same or is it actually like a completely different kind of process which goes through that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've got on the perfect lead in here, I think, because when you take a look at sports and sports data collection, of course, this is being played out in the physical world, right? So collecting that data always comes with some kind of extra effort, I like to call it. So either be it manually, people sitting in the audience or watching a stream of the sport and sort of annotating data or writing down or inputting some data into some kind of tool. Or be it like semi-automated, I guess, which you could imagine you'd have a camera pointing at the field, doing some computer vision, tracking players around, or even having some kind of tracking devices on the player to track their positions. And that's all okay, but you can imagine that comes with quite a high cost, first of all. It can be quite error prone, if one of these devices stops working, if the computer vision algorithm isn't quite perfect, it stops tracking you. And usually it's also not very fast. And then I'm usually talking about the manual efforts, right? And if you take a look at the esports data ecosystem, then of course you can sort of apply the same tool set that you've used for sports, and you could also try and do manual collection on esports video streams, or even have something like computer vision in place to get as much data as you can out of the video stream. It's still quite limiting because, even with watching the video stream, you don't see all of the data on the stream all the time. Or in terms of like when using manual efforts, that's also still with the same downsides as before, as you have with sports in terms of speed, accuracy, and so on. And esports is very unique in that way, because it's not being played out in the physical world. It's being played out in a totally virtual world. And that has the upside that you have total control over this world. And the game server basically knows about absolutely everything that is going on in there, right? So you don't really have to bother that much with tracking. It's already there. It's built in. So then the question arises that it's just about like getting the data out of that game server, right? So the data is definitely there, but how do we get it to a place where it can be accessible to everyone, and all these like cool use cases that we've already spoken about? And this is very much what we are focusing on at GRID. We're basically we've developed a game server SDK. That's the software development kit, and you can think of it as just some kind of plugin that you can use with your server that is running an esports title, and that is then directly sending that data over to our esports platform, to the GRID. And in that way, you don't have to. You're getting the best of all. You're getting the best benefits on all these things, right? You're getting very accurate data, very granular data, and all that in just real time. So then you're solving all these problems that sports have, and these similar methods being used for esports as well. And at the same time, you're doing so in a very cost-effective way as well. So not only data is being tracked for, maybe the higher tier of esports or sports tournaments, because there it's sort of worth it, so to say. But for esports, you can now also start to, gather data about absolutely every tournament, even sort of like very casual tournaments. And I think that's absolutely great. That's possible for esports in that way.
I think you're kind of spot on in the point where it's like it's like one platform, isn't it? Like in terms of like, I feel like with sports, there is this thing where you need the equipment, and then you kind of have to rely on that equipment to then have the right data for you. And it's very like one-to-one, or like one to a club essentially. Or like just an organization itself. Whereas like with kind of it being digital, it's kind of like you have one solution which can fit all essentially, and it can kind of go into all as well. And it also like, if you're a Vanarama South football club and stuff like that, you're probably not going to have that data equipment because you're not going to be able to invest and afford that. Where if you're like an amateur tournament who's wanting to kind of look at like rising stars, so such as like the We Play Academy League or something like that, like they will have that data with them to analyze those players, to create broadcast information, because that data is already there and it is just collecting it. It's like a golden mine, isn't it? Where it's like you know what's in there, you just got to use the tools to get it out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you picked up on a really good point there, which is really something that we are targeting across the sort of whole of our vision and what we want to do. And this is that it really levels the playing field. When we're talking about teams and players being able to analyze their performance, this isn't now just the biggest teams with the biggest bankroll that can get access to the tools in order for them to progress. This can be scaled for. Yeah, of course, to the top teams, but also to the amateur teams that are looking to break in and emerge into the competition. And the key point about that is, of course, it's great for the teams. It allows scope to those who want to work hard and use this kind of data to do that. It allows them this opportunity, but it's also great for the sport and the individual esports, because it's allowing all these teams to kind of, really progress and grow the community around the title. Mm-hmm. Also, the other side of leveling the playing field is that the technology that we're building is scalable. So it can be used by, the largest entities in esports, the biggest esports already are existing. It can also be used by, emerging titles. Our kind of dream is that, an independent title perhaps could pick this up and use data as a key part of their business model, using all of the same kind of tools and making their data, official data assets available on the grid. And they can grow their sport organically using this data to empower their community. No matter what the size of their community is, it'll always help grow it. And so this is really something key that we aim at, scale from, to work for both the big, but also the small and emerging.
And I guess as well, like what's really interesting about like getting, the ability to try and collect this data as well, is probably the one thing which is like still kind of being developed is optimizing that to a level where it can be, to like an optimal level, essentially. So, for example, like when betting kind of comes into play, and I don't want to go too much into like the betting scene and stuff like that, but like data is integral to betting. Like you need good data to, have like actual transparent betting to go through. If you don't have like good data which goes with that, then it sort of comes into a little bit of problems in terms of the betting scene. So I guess it's kind of important to make sure that these solutions are correct or efficient, and then also are just kind of always being utilized correctly. And I guess that's kind of the challenge now, and that's kind of building this system again now, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So the systems that we build is, this is another unique part of esports. When you're comparing esports to sports data, Hans touched a little bit on, how sports data is collected and the kind of key metrics you've got. You've kind of got accuracy, speed, and how granular you can go. And when you're collecting in this very manual approach, you have to give on something. You can't have everything, or it's very, very difficult to attain it. With esports, that's not the case. You can get everything, and you can also make sure that this is secured. You can make sure that the data is official. You know where it's coming from. You know that it's accurate. You know that you know the most about what's going on in a match because of how granular you can get it, and you know it straight away. And this is obviously perfect for a betting use case, as well as all of the other use cases as well. It's very important that that the higher the quality of the data that you're pushing in, and the higher your product's going to be. And that's obviously no different for the regulated sportsbook industry as well. And it allows them to innovate on top of a secure, robust, and rich data source.
Yeah, and Hans as well. I think Hans, I want to kind of go into a little bit more like the data side as well, because I'm a big fan of data, so that I think this is why it's really good, and I think a lot of people kind of want to know a little bit about the nitty gritty. So when you kind of come into a game and you get all this data from this game title or this match, how do you separate this like big clump of data into, okay, we're going to use this for betting, or this is a good thing which could go into betting, this is a good thing that can go into broadcast. How is this clump of like coal turned into kind of a diamond into going into each things?
Yeah, cool. Let's dive into it. So basically, first of all, at GRID, we're always, as Chris has already said, he summed up quite a lot of different use cases. So definitely like not one in particular that we sort of want to limit ourselves to, because our products are just being modeled across the esports domain as a whole. Like you're just modeling the game, and what you do with the data is sort of on the downstream consumers, and you can build a whole lot of cool things on there. So we're always looking to make as much of esports data itself available as we can, absolutely. And it's very different in a sense for different esports titles out there. Some game publishers do expose some data, be it either through their own APIs, through their client, or wherever, whereas others don't put too much effort into exposing it, right? Because you got to remember that these game publishers, they're primary concern still is, they're a gaming company there, and they want to make a really good game and really polish this, get the balance just right. Their primary concern is not about exposing data necessarily. So that's where we come in as GRID, I think, because our primary focus as a company is just all about esports data. So we can really prioritize sort of taking that off their shoulders, because obviously they want to build a whole lot of cool stuff on their side, and they don't want to get into sort of the nitty-gritty data problems all the time, at least. So I think we're really well positioned to do so. So currently, the esports state is, it's very fragmented, as we always say at GRID. You have a lot of different esports titles, you have a lot of different data granularity, a lot of different problems to solve there. Currently it's more like you have to have, or like the problem that we're trying to solve, right, as GRID, is that people don't have to have custom integrations with every single one of these esports titles, which might have very specific ways of dealing with data and very specific problems. But they can have like one very nice standardized way of accessing esports title data for different titles in the same way. And even though you might think that in esports there's a whole lot of different titles going on, like a MOBA is very different from an FPS, for instance, there's still quite a lot of common data points. Like you've got teams playing in both, you've got players playing in both, you have the concept of a player killing another player, and so on. And that's really something that we try to leverage at GRID, because if you can reuse a whole lot of stuff actually across these titles, and if you do so, you can make a product that is very nice to use for downstream consumers, because suddenly, a kill in Dota might not look very different anymore from a kill in CSGO. And as Chris said, like whenever there's some kind of new esports title coming up out of nowhere next week, it's quite cool if you could sort of like reuse everything that you've built for one title like PUBG, for instance, for the next big battle royale. That would be absolutely great, and this is something that we're actively working towards with the platform that we're building.
So I expect Pokemon Unite data to be coming through very soon.
soon.
I think it's something that I kind of wanted to ask though. But like, what's quite difficult about certain titles? Is there like a certain kind of like title which is harder to kind of collect data than other? And not maybe a title like a specific name, but is an FPS harder than what a MOBA is, or is it mobile, which is quite difficult? And why are they quite difficult in terms of collection of data?
Yeah, I think it's definitely valid, because in some esports genres, you just inherently have more data or data points available, I guess. So in MOBAs, that's like a traditional example of a title that is regarded as quite complex, quite a lot of things going on, quite a lot of data points, abilities flying here and there, whereas an FPS title like CSGO, for instance, might be a bit simpler, if you want to call it that way, with just some weapons and people shooting each other and planting a bomb, but out of besides that, there's not too much going on. So that's definitely a challenge. In sort of the titles that do offer this rich variety of data points. Some of the times these are not always all available, like the most interesting bits you might not be able to get at just because they aren't exposed at the time, or an esports title goes through a patch change and there's something new being introduced. That can also take quite some time usually to be exposed in data. And that's a bit of a shame, because like with new changes, a new season starting for any esports, for instance, with huge changes, you kind of want to be able to analyze the data from the get-go, right when these changes have been made. The teams are looking to sort of change up their strategies and trying out different things. That's when it's really interesting. And that's another problem that we find at GRID, that sometimes sort of the exposed data is lacking a bit, or like being delayed a bit in time with patch cycles, for instance.
So, Chris, actually, then this leads me on to like a topic that I wanted to talk to you about as well. It's like, how much then of a reliance does a data platform have now on publishers, tournament organizers, and other esports entities? Is it very much a, they have the say, and it's like, yes, you can have it, and if you're not, then what kind of happens there as well?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and data platform, such as us and the one we operate, focusing on sustainability and growth in esports, certainly should work incredibly closely with the publisher and tournament organizers. We're doing so to maximize the value of their official data assets, and I think the key start of like my answer to this question is. The keyword is there. It's their content, and we provide them a platform with which to publish this content and make it usable and accessible. We also provide a whole host of adjacent technology to allow them to, extract and publish the best quality and highest granularity data, that's available. So I think because, we have this approach where, you'll only find official data on the grid. This is, something that is again, a bit of a difference between sports and esports. In sports, official and unofficial data kind of look a bit similar because they're all collected in the same way. I could be an official data partner of a sports event and I could be collecting data, but there could also be someone else sitting in the crowd, inputting data into a mobile device or something, and the data will look pretty similar, honestly. In esports, that's not the case because ultimately the data rights holder who we partner with, the publisher, the tournament organizer, they have control over the data source and they have control over the technology that's integrated there in order to extract this data and publish it. So we are... I think a platform such as GRID is certainly very reliant on our partners and very reliant on forming close partnerships to work with them in a way such that they are also able to rely on us as well. And we operate at GRID. It's often talked about this kind of skin in the game model that works to fulfill this vision around ensuring that there's a fair and aligned value flow. We're working closely with our partners, helping them succeed, and then being able to make the most of their data assets through our unique approaches. And like Hans mentioned, it's very core to our vision that we build everything in a title agnostic way. This means that we build it once for one title, but we can use it for another title. And the way we model data feeds is all around using these title agnostic mechanisms, because although every title is very different and it's very complex, they also have a lot of similar mechanisms that we can then take advantage of to make sure that people can scale from one title to another seamlessly. And that's also a very important part of what we do. It's not only allowing us to operate and scale so that we can scale to multiple titles, but it's also passing this benefit to our downstream consumers, people building awesome products in the esports industry. If you build a product on top of our platform for one title, it's very cost effective and, ideally, it costs you nothing almost to move to another title. The integration's already there. You already understand these generic title agnostic mechanisms, or your system does, and therefore you can understand these for another title, which is a key part of our approach, which we then work together with publishers, tournament organizers to understand and work closely with them to employ our technologies to then gain all these benefits.
I think it's very interesting actually, because you don't think of it until someone kind of says it. But like you said, you go to a football match, you see everything that happens. You can record the data with what happens. I guess maybe running distance is a little bit harder to kind of, judge. But in terms of the basic stats of if someone scores a goal, everyone in that kind of audience knows that person has scored a goal, that person has got an assist, that person's made even that many passes. If they watch a specific player, they can find things like that. But with esports, because it's kind of behind this kind of data wall, you do have to kind of have people to partner with to kind of get that data out, because for being honest, I don't think publishers are at this point willing to give the data to everybody for free at this point, because it's kind of there's a lot of more intricacies I think behind that. You can't just say here's every data which we have because I think there's probably implications of that, which you guys are aware of. I think in an ideal world, I think everybody would love if, Riot or, We Play, basically said like, here's everything, but I don't think it's going to be in a world like that. So to kind of come to like the end of this topic, and I know we could have talked a lot more about, even like more about the intricacies of data, but I do want to go to you, Hans, first. So where do you kind of see the esports data landscape going? I'm guessing you don't see it where, again, like all the publishers and all the tournament organizers are going to be like, here's all the data. But where do you see the data landscape going? Are you going to see more people trying to integrate themselves in, or is there like a specific part of data which you think is going to be more emphasized in the future as well?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I started with it when I said sort of that I still see esports data at its very infancy at this point. It's very much a tipping point of sort of going further than where sports data is at the moment. I can only see this continue and having way more data available and accessible in a way. And I honestly think, the data is there on the game server and the game publishers have the rights to this data. I don't think they're trying to hide it, or like gatekeep it in any sort of way. But as I said before, it's just usually not their primary concern. But once you do get it out, it opens up such a cool world. You can build so many things on top of it, and it opens up a really awesome space for new esports titles growing, as we talked about before as well. Imagine a new esports title being launched next week, and sort of through leveraging their data onto a platform like ours, for instance, they can sort of get that extra help they need to really launch their title in a very wide way. And maybe something that we haven't touch upon yet, if I remember correctly, is that sort of like the inherent complexity of some of these esports titles. Since in sports, most people are very familiar with sort of the usual sports, right? And it's pretty easy to get into it, even if you haven't played sports before. It's sometimes very different with some esports genres, right? If you haven't played that game title, it can be quite a challenge to follow it. And I think data will play a major role into that. And that's why I mentioned it, because for a new emergent esports title, if you want to sort of create a very big following from day one or go mainstream, you gotta have the data that sort of leads new people in and introduces them into the game and how it works. And that isn't only like for new players joining or new spectators looking at the first live stream of such an esports title, but also for the more experienced ones. You can offer, you can be very individually focused. You might offer certain data points to very experienced spectators, whereas you might only offer like the very basic data points and very basic rules of these esports titles to new people coming in. And I can definitely see a lot of potential in that sort of space as well as you grow, as you want to grow a new esports title through the use of data, essentially.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this the accessibility of esports. I mean, when you're watching a football match for the first time, you can get what's going on. You also have like you can kind of relate there. We all know what it's like to kick a ball. We all know how that looks pretty difficult in order to do that. But if you flick on a Dota match for the first time, or you're watching StarCraft and you've never seen it before, I've got no idea what's good, what's hard, what's something that's unknown, brand new, innovative strategy. I've got no idea. So data plays a huge part in this accessibility and helping people understand what's exciting. And I certainly think that's an exciting aspect of the future. I was also just going to touch on one thing you mentioned around essentially data being available en masse to everyone. And I think that this is also a core problem that we're aiming to help solve, and that is that in an ideal world, you don't lose the value of the data from people where there's a use case to pay for it and they're getting value from what they're using it for. But also you want to encourage Hans mentioned at the beginning around his sort of lead into GRID, he was doing a thesis and needed data in order to create his master's project. We want people in the community like Hans or others with a spark of an idea to be able to get access to data to potentially build this idea into something. And so I think there's definitely a sweet spot there, and we're looking at aiming our technology and our platform to kind of solve this situation so that value both financial, but also in growing sustainably and organically a community and products around it. This is really something that we're aiming at doing, and growing the accessibility of esports data at the most granular level.
And for either of you, I think something that kind of Hans was even saying especially was, do you think that then the esports titles who are wanting to go specifically and building themselves into esports are looking at data in terms of like a priority list now? Because I feel like it very much was gameplay, sort out kind of like the actual game stuff and everything like that. But now, as you're seeing new titles come in, is there this emphasis on, but also we've got to make sure that when we do have a broadcast and we do kind of do things like this and like I said, with betting or anything like that, that data also has to be kind of a priority as well?
Yeah, exactly. I think if you want your new title or esports to do well, data should be a priority. But at the same time, as I said before, if you're just starting out a game, that's not going to be your main concern, right? You don't even know if it's going to be successful yet, or you just want to get to the launch, right? You want to get players to play this, compete in it before really exposing any data or doing any work there. And I think like most esports titles that have launched in the past, I can't think of a single one that has launched with an API, for instance, exposing this data, right? So I think like with our approach, what we're trying to do is really make that very cheap from the get-go. Essentially, like as they build out their game, they can leverage our SDK to sort of build along as they go. They don't really have to input a lot of resources into it, because they can just leverage the software that we've built without having to have a lot of overhead. And at the same time, then it doesn't become too risky to invest a lot of time into doing this, because your esports title might not just take off. It's always very hard to tell what will be successful and whatnot. But once you're there, once you're at the launch, and suddenly, imagine this game popping off in the first week, how amazing is it that you have a full data suite available from day one that can only propel your esports title forwards a whole lot.
Yeah, and I think, on top of that, just to add, there's a lot of different things when you're building a game that you kind of have to do, but are not your core game. Perhaps, this is like a matchmaking algorithm to make sure that you can find other players to play with. Perhaps it's, how do you, find friends and talk to them and communicate? How do you scale your servers, so that you can handle all of the players that want to play? These are all kind of things that you have to do. But it's not core to or it's not central to like the core experience of your game. And I see data going in this way as well. People don't build them anymore; they use services for these. And I totally see that. We want to be there to help these games developers to be able to add a data component as a sort of core concern from the day they launch, and we think we can scale to do that. And because of the unique approach we have. They don't just get, an API out of this that people can build stuff on top of, but because of the title agnostic approach, they actually get a set of products that are already built on our data that will just work automatically for their titles. And this, I think, is very exciting. And hopefully, we can see some real success stories built off the back of this with smaller and emerging titles as well as the larger ones.
Yeah, no, Chris, that kind of goes into like the question that I kind of had with you. I know you've touched on a couple, but are there any other like new data solutions that kind of GRID are starting to work on to develop the esports sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do have some pretty exciting announcements, but these are coming soon, and unfortunately, I can't talk about them today. But I will give a couple of teasers.
I had to
Yeah, you did.
try,
Yeah. So we're really working right now. We've mentioned a couple of our key products. We have a set of data APIs. These are being worked on and being expanded. We have a couple of new titles, which I can't talk about yet, but we hope to be able to announce them over the sort of next part of this year. And we're also always working on our game server SDK to allow the granularity of data and the richness of data that can be extracted there to be enhanced. And these are the core focuses, the things that we're focusing on. We're also a key part of what we're aiming to do is look at this problem that you mentioned, making data accessible. And there's a bit of a teaser. I can't mention it now, but we have some real exciting stuff in the pipeline towards the end of this year that's really going to please the sort of Hanses of the future looking to build their thesis projects on top of a rich and widely available data source.
Chris, Hans, thank you both for coming on and talking with me about data. Hopefully everybody else really enjoyed basically us just really getting into the nitty gritty, I think, with some of the topics of data as well. And we only just touched the surface, let's be honest. We could easily do 5 more podcasts just around this entire topic in itself. But I do want to thank you both for coming on. And if anybody else wants to kind of learn more about the data as well and stuff like that, we do also have 3 other episodes on data as well. We'll be diving into another specific sector of data, which I'm really looking forward to kind of, getting those out as well. So thank you both for coming on. Do you have any final words before we wrap up?
Yeah, just from my side, say thanks a lot for having us, Tom. It's been a fantastic conversation. If anyone wants to, to find out a bit more, you can find us at grid.gg. We're also at GRID Esports on most social media outlets. And we're, as you can kind of tell, and as Tom mentioned, we love talking about data. So if you want to get in contact about this topic or, anything else around what GRID does, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to definitely talk more about it.
Please do. We can talk for hours about this thing, as you mentioned, Tom. Thanks so much for having us.
I was on mute then for a second. So yeah. So what I've basically heard then is you flood their DMs, with every data question imaginable. No, thanks a lot, guys, for coming on. And like I said, if you do want to find more about GRID, go over to their website. But also as well, we do have some more episodes going up about data. We've also got stuff on law and esports, which we have done, fan engagement as well. So, hopefully everybody else can enjoy the other content as well. But until then, we'll see you later.